Hi everyone, Roy here on my channel Roy Reads Anything, which is about old books and that kind of thing. And I've got 2 weeks of GarbAugust reads to catch up on because last week's videos didn't work. They've gone to the whatever Valhalla unmade videos go to live in. So GarbAugust, the reading event devised by CriminOlly, which celebrates trashy books, and that's what I've been reading. So concentrating on the weekly prompts. The week 2 reads were Paperbacks from Hell or Vintage Smut, and I've aimed to do both. So I started with The Rats by James Herbert. Oddly that I've never read this before, because I'm kind of an age when it came out when I was like a teenager. 1974, I think. And I've read other James Herbert, finally got to this and really enjoyed it. It's an absolutely wild ride, a horror thriller, as you might expect, with ratty action, gore and violence coming at you all the time, and a wraparound cover, and a rat smiling at you. So yeah, lots of good things about this. I think one thing is, one reason I think it was such a success is it does 2 things really. It's got the sort of primal fear of vermin, which is a deeply ingrained human thing, but also was tapping into the zeitgeist of the times, because 1970s Britain, rats were in the news. Rats were a thing that was in the public mind for a couple of reasons. One is the rise of the super rats. So looking at mentions of super rats in the press, they really rose in the 1970s. So the idea of rats that are becoming immune to poison. And also because 70s Britain was characterized by strikes, industrial unrest, including bin men, refuse collectors. Again, the news full of stuff, piles of rubbish, mountains of rubbish, and rats being battled, rats being fighting with troops as part of all of that. So it sort of got this 70s sense of, things unraveling around the edges. Is part of it. So great fun there. Other cool 70s stuff too, like the guy, the protagonist, the kind of everyman who steps up and helps to save the day, drives a Hillman Minx. Strange choice of car, or strange choice of name for a car. Why do you want minx-like qualities in a car? So yes, enjoyed that. So that was the vintage horror. Moving on to vintage smut, a much less well-known book, August Heat by Roger Allan. I actually came across this as a t-shirt design. Decided I didn't dare wear the t-shirt, but I would read the book. So this came out in the early 60s, published by Midwood Books, who offer you the best in dynamic, virile fiction. Books that are fast-paced, bold, lusty, and packed with excitement. Adult, sophisticated books. So I think these kind of kitsch covers are fun to look at. I've never actually delved within one to see what the story's actually like. And in brief, it's a great fantasy for a middle-aged man who likes the idea that you can be as grumpy as possible, complete curmudgeon, and women will throw themselves at you because of that. Yeah, and surprisingly unsexy, really. But it's all in there, but it's slightly off stage. So still, gotta love the cover. So that was my hitting the prompts, and then I thought I'll go a little bit further, and another book that sort of hits both those prompts and more besides, Virgin Witch, a novelisation of a movie. So sorry, this being a family channel, I've made trousers for this man, because I didn't really like to see his bottom staring at me all the time. Yes, right, so movie came out in 1971, and it's a kind of mixture of a sub-Dennis Wheatley plot about a black magic coven, combined with a sort of bosoms all the time sex comedy, bit like Confessions of a Milkman or something. So it's not a film I'd ever want to watch. But one interesting thing about it, Klaus Vogel is indeed a pseudonym, and the real writer, given that I'd just been looking at soap operas in a previous video, Hazel Adair. Hazel Adair, co-creator of Crossroads, for example, and lots of other soapy stuff besides. Creator of hundreds of hours of daytime television. And lurking within all of that was this fascination with magic and sorcery, unless the soap operas were themselves a kind of magic. Anyway, yes, I felt if I'd sort of gone for relatively classy options here, so I've plummeted to the depths of trash with Virgin Witch. Moving on to week 3, I've gone back to my can I get both prompts with the same title. So we're looking at novelisations and or books by famous people. So Tarantula was my novelisation. So Tarantula was a movie, a Universal science fiction horror movie that came out in the mid-50s. And this is a novelisation that came out in the mid-80s. And it's for kids, basically. So this Crestwood House did lots of books like this. There are some orange covered ones that are sort of like vampires and werewolves, so a sort of a overview of a particular type of monster. And the purple ones are novelizations of particular films. And the fact that the series is edited by Dr. Howard Schroeder, a professor in reading and language arts in a department of elementary education, suggests that they're a sort of literacy, let's get kids reading kind of thing. Nevertheless, it is a novelisation of a movie, quite a good movie, I thought, about a giant spider. So what's happening is a scientist is experimenting. As usual, he's got good aims. He wants to sort of help feed the world by being able to create gigantic creatures. And it all gets out of hand because if the creature expanding drug gets into people, it makes them turn into monsters. And that mad scientist is played by the same actor who was the boss guy, Mr. Waverley, in Man from U.N.C.L.E. Okay, there he is doing some science. And yeah, a tarantula is one of his things. So, and basically the special effect is a regular sized spider filmed and superimposed on the sort of desert landscape. The movies were always in deserts at this period, sort of This Island Earth, those kind of ones. Anyway, then point of view character arrives. Steve is her name, and she is a graduate student. It's a summer job. I'll be doing lab work, cooking, writing reports and so on. So leaving aside the cooking, the fact that the sort of point of view character who comes into the kind of gothic environment where it's all happening, in previous films, in the sort of Universal horror film series, is often like a nurse or a governess, so, you know, moving up the career ladder perhaps. However, when Mr. Waverley is ranting and raving about his mad science, Steve was used to scientists who shouted. So, yes, 'twas ever thus. Anyway, it's all getting out of hand. The science is happening. The cattle are being eaten, and you never see cities being destroyed as the poster promises, but there is quite an effective scene of a house being destroyed, and I think the very clunkiness of the special effects almost makes it worse for me. Spiders scuttling after people, and it all gets blown up. So is it terrifying? I don't know. The blurb actually points out the Air Force defeats the creature with bombs and the world is safe again. So defusing the jeopardy, perhaps. So that was my Tarantula novelisation. For a Tarantula book, I've got Bob Dylan's Tarantula. So this was books by famous people. Books by famous people is the prompt. It's called Tarantula as well. Is it trashy? Not really. There's some trashiness to the way it's packaged, particularly the guy who wrote the blurb for this was Panther Books. So this was written in the mid-60s, I think published in the early 70s, and this is a 70s edition, and it's pretty clear that the blurb writer read no further than the first 10 pages, plucked out some little bits and sort of made out that's what the whole book was about, which it would have been terrible. But basically it's full on poetic, what would get called stream of consciousness, I suppose. I'm not sure that's the right word really, but it's an absolute torrent of scenes and words and people and little jokes, and if you like poetry by people like Allen Ginsberg or maybe Arthur Rimbaud, it's tapping into that sort of vibe. So it's it's proper literature, but it is a book by a famous person, so not sure where that leaves me. I sought out another book by a famous person, Someday, maybe by Lauren Graham, or Someday, 5F Cool, as the barcode sticker says. So Lauren Graham is actor who was in Gilmore Girls and Parenthood. Having watched both those shows, probably seen hundreds of hours of her. And it's a novel about a struggling actress in New York in the 90s. So it sort of felt a bit more like a celebrity book to me, in that you're kind of getting the character is rather similar to the characters Lauren Graham is famous for portraying. So you're sort of buying into the Lauren Graham-ness of the whole thing. And I really enjoyed it. I mean, no great surprises as to how it works out. I don't normally like illustrations in books, but if Ed McBain's 87th Precinct books have taught us anything, it's that pictures of documents can be quite effective. So here you get Filofax pages, proper Filofax pages. In fact, she has a brown leather Filofax, just like me. So I've kind of got a direct mystical connection to the celebrity world. The book itself, though, it's I should have sent this back really. I mean, talking of trashiness, it's dirty, battered. There's kids' crayons on some of the pages. There's a sort of muddy trail across part of the cover, as if somebody's like reenacted the bicycle riding part of the artwork. And it smells like an old handbag with candy in it that's been left in a lost luggage office for about a year. So that was pretty unpleasant, but I persisted to finish reading the book, which was quite good. So I've done extra famous person, and I did extra novelisations too. I did Conan the Barbarian. So Conan the Barbarian movie that came out in 1982 had a novelisation which I've never read, despite reading lots of other Conan books. The sort of authentic stories by Robert E. Howard, other pastiches. But even though I quite liked the film, I didn't quite feel moved to pick this up at the time. made me think one reason perhaps novelisations seem like a sort of lower art form is that there's so many people involved in creating them. So if we think literature, proper literature, is the creation of one person's brain going down onto the page, then it's a bit different when, there's two authors named on the front, L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter, based on a screenplay by another two dudes, John Milius and Oliver Stone. Then the introduction tells us a lot about Robert E. Howard, who actually created the character, and also reveals that it was Catherine de Camp that did a lot of the writing. So that's at least 6 people involved in the authorship. But, it hangs together pretty well, considering. Interesting to see how the movie script that was itself took bits and pieces of lots of existing stories, a lot from Robert E. Howard and some from other places, how that sort of percolates into a book. I think if I had bought it at the time as a way of reliving the film, because I didn't have a VHS player then, I probably would have been reasonably happy, would have noticed that some bits are different, presumably it's novelising the script and therefore there's some different dialogue and some slight variations. But for something like this, totally beyond the pale if you're considering the sort of overall oeuvre of Conan. It's GarbAugust, so all rules are suspended, and I quite enjoyed it. I was also quite impressed that they made a slight attempt to make it palatable to people who read the books, so that you could put this book alongside the other books, because the story contradicts so much that's in the original stuff and even in the pastiches. So it's something else again. How does that make sense? Well, I refer you to the Nemedian Chronicles, which is a famous quote that you get in most of the stories and in the movie. Know, O Prince, that between the years when the oceans drank Atlantis and the gleaming cities, and the rise of the sons of Aries, there was an age undreamed of. So that's sort of giving us the setting. And then here's an extra bit of Nemedian Chronicle for this book. And know yet further, O Prince, that in that half-forgotten age the proudest kingdom in the world was Aquilonia, reigning supreme in the dreaming west. And this same Conan ruled from the throne of Aquilonia as Conan the Great, the mightiest lord of his day. And many were the tales spun about him as he was in his youth. Wherefore it is now difficult to perceive the truth amid the many legends. So bringing in a sort of unreliable narrator kind of thing as an excuse for this being a different story than we've heard before, you get more of that as well. Privileged was I, Callias of Shamar, above all my brethren among the scribes of Aquilonia, to have heard from the lips of my king, Conan the Great, the story of his travails and the high adventures that befell him along the way to the summit of greatness. Here is the tale as he told it to me in the later days of his reign, when age had laid its fell hand upon him, albeit lightly. So it's Conan himself telling it to this scribe fellow, so I guess Conan is entitled to retcon his own story if he wants to. Apparently that's what happened. Look at him. Are you going to argue with him? Maybe not. Anyway, yes, quite fun. Still had some time, so I also read the novelisation of a film I hadn't seen, Young Sherlock Holmes. Came out in 85, 86. Despite never having watched it, I always felt slightly invested in it because there was a casting session for the Watson character held in the venue I worked at that time. They advertised for boys of the right age range, and I can remember it specifically had the word plump in the description of how they should be, and they needed some acting experience. So the whole place was full of plump teenagers being shepherded by hopeful parents. And for some reason, it's a bit like definition of an optimist, really. A guy who was like in his 30s who came dressed as Sherlock Holmes in a deerstalker and an Inverness cape. Anyway, novelisation. I've read the real Sherlock Holmes stories, read lots of other team-ups and pastiches and crossovers and general abuses of Holmes. This is okay. I mean, right from the beginning, you've got something that puts it into a completely different universe, in that Holmes and Watson meet as schoolboys in a private school, and they have an adventure. There's like a sect of there's an Egyptian sort of cult, and there's sort of some steampunk type stuff involving a flying machine. Not bad as a novelisation. I think the author, Alan Arnold, obviously did a lot of research, and you get some big info dumps about things like Egyptian history and lots of Victorian details. Whereas some of the big action set pieces seem rather sort of glossed over and seem to fly past quite quickly. But that's okay, you know. So something like a train journey is a lot more interesting than a fight in a pyramid. Maybe that is always the case. And also, somebody, either it was in the script and not in the movie, or it's in the novelisation and not in the script, throws in a little bit of foreshadowing of the Holmes character has him necking half a bottle of codeine linctus as during an adventure. So yeah, these are okay. I mean, it reminded me of one thing I dislike in movie things. It's the origin story, and particularly the unnecessary origin stories of sort of legendary characters. I would prefer it if they were left to come from slightly mysterious beginnings, and certainly would prefer it if kind of modern day psychological explanations of how they end up weren't kind of layered onto how they come to be. But there you go, GarbAugust, so just enjoy. So that's the sort of stuff I've been reading. Next week is Anything Goes. I've got a mystery item to read, and I'll be back probably in a week or so, because we've got some travelling to do. So yeah, back soon with something else.